Have you ever wondered why the person who once held you so tenderly on cold nights could also be the one who hurt you the most? Why marriage, what we once dreamed would be our safe harbor, can sometimes become the loneliest place on earth? Maybe it's not because you chose the wrong person. Maybe it's because you haven't yet seen the deeper truth. Marriage doesn't begin with love. It begins with karma. Ajahn Chah once said, "You say you love someone. Do you love their peace or their suffering?" Sometimes we don't marry someone because we're compatible, but because they feel familiar. Not familiar in personality, but familiar in pain. The pain we've carried long before this life. Marriage, it turns out, isn't a reward for being good. It's a mirror, reflecting back the parts of ourselves that are still unhealed. And if you've ever felt like you're married to your own wound, then perhaps this story is a quiet invitation for you to awaken. So take a deep breath. We'll begin from the place where love feels like it has already broken. Marriage for many is seen as the final destination of love. But for some soul, it doesn't begin with love. It begins with karma. You might feel it from the very first moment, an inexplicable pull towards someone you've never met before. They enter your life like a whisper from the past, a look, a voice, a strange familiarity that makes no sense to the mind. But the heart knows this isn't the first time you fall in love. But this love, it's not smooth, it's not peaceful, it's a storm. You find yourself swept up in intense emotions, arguments that escalate too quickly, wounds that feel far too deep. You try, you sacrifice, you hold back, but somehow it still hurts, and you begin to wonder, what am I doing wrong? Maybe you're not doing anything wrong. Maybe you're just meeting a familiar soul from a past life where healing was never completed. Ajahn Chah once asked, "You say you love someone. Do you love their peace or their suffering?" You love this person, but maybe what you're drawn to is the anxiety they awaken in you, because that's what feels like home, not love, but familiarity with pain. You may have grown up in a household full of emotional turbulence, and now the storm feels safe. You're not loving because they're good for you. You're loving because they feel known, even if what you recognize is your old wound. Sometimes what we call attraction is not love. It's karma calling us back. In the karmic realm, every encounter carries a message. Some people enter our lives to teach us endurance. Others arrive so we can learn how to let go. And a few appear simply to show us how to forgive, not them, but ourselves. Marriage, then, is not a reward. It's a classroom where two souls come face to face with each other's darkness, not to harm, but to understand, not to win, but to dissolve the ego. And here lies the paradox. The person who hurts you the most may also be the one who brings you closest to awakening, because they reflect you in raw honesty. They echo your fears, your self-doubt, the very parts of you you've spent a lifetime hiding. You thought they were judging you, but maybe it was your own judgment projected back at you like a mirror. So maybe marriage isn't about perfect harmony. Maybe it's about sacred disruption, a quiet tearing down of illusions, of who you thought you were and what love was supposed to be. And if you're standing in the middle of a marriage that feels confusing or painful, perhaps this isn't the end. Perhaps it's the beginning of your most powerful healing. She wasn't rejecting you. It was the wound inside her that couldn't accept love. So the question becomes, can you look at that wound, not to blame it, but to understand it. Sit with that for a moment. Take a breath. And let me tell you a story about a woman who once believed she had found true love, only to realize she was stepping into an old karmic loop, repeating itself once again. She was a quiet woman, gentle, thoughtful, always trying to be the one who understands. When she met him, a man with a warm smile and eyes that had seen storms, she felt safe. He listened. He saw her, not in the loud, dramatic way, but in the kind that reached into her wounds and simply said, "I'm here." And she thought, this must be the one I've been waiting for. But a few months after the wedding, things began to shift. He became distant. The kindness faded into silence. The warmth gave way to cold remarks. She began to ask herself, what did I do wrong? How did someone who once loved me become the person who hurts me the most? What she didn't know was this: marriage is not the reward for love. It's the mirror of what remains unhealed. What she didn't see was that this man wasn't her destiny. He might have been her lesson. Ajahn Chah once said, "If you let go a little, you'll have a little peace. If you let go a lot, you'll have a lot of peace." But how do you let go when you're still hoping? How do you let go when a part of you still whispers, maybe he'll come back to who he was? Many nights she woke at 3 a.m., turned over and saw his back. Not just physically turned away, but emotionally withdrawn from the marriage, from the connection, from her. And in those silent hours, she felt lonelier than ever. Not because he didn't love her anymore, but because she no longer recognized herself in the marriage. She used to be full of laughter, used to believe in kindness. Now she walked carefully, spoke gently, shrunk herself, as if even her existence might be too much. Here's a truth we rarely name. We don't just marry a person. We marry the parts of ourselves we haven't healed, brought to the surface by the one we love. What she felt at the beginning, that haunting sense of familiarity, wasn't love. It was a karmic echo. She thought she was falling in love with a man, but she was stepping back into an old pattern, a wound resurfacing in a different form. Maybe you've been there too. In a relationship where you no longer feel like yourself. You try, you endure, you hold on. Not because of love, but because letting go feels like failure. But maybe you didn't fail. Maybe you're simply in the middle of a sacred lesson. And if you are in that confusing space within your marriage, pause for a moment, not to quit, but to ask, is this truly love? Or is this a wound replaying its old rhythm? Because sometimes people don't leave you. They're just drowning in the parts of themselves they don't know how to love. And in that moment, you're invited into the deepest conversation you'll ever have, the one with your own soul. Because once you can see it, you can begin to heal it. If you're still here, nodding quietly, maybe this story was meant for you. We're about to go deeper into the place where attraction isn't romance, but karma calling your soul to wake up. After many long, quiet nights, she decided to save the marriage. She believed that if she were patient enough, kind enough, loving enough, he would return to the man she first fell in love with. She read books on marriage. She listened to podcasts about keeping the spark alive. She learned his favorite dishes, kept the house warm and welcoming, chose silence over arguments, and softness over confrontation. She believed if she could become a better version of herself, then he would change. The distance between them would fade. Love would bloom again, like a dried tree touched by spring rain. And for a while, it seemed to work. He smiled more. They spoke again, even if only in small, surface-level conversations. Her heart began to flicker with hope. But slowly, things began to sink again. This time, deeper. He came home late. He stopped texting. He no longer explained. He sat next to her, but lived in a different world. She tried to reach out. He stayed silent. She asked. He sighed. She cried. He left the room. Then one evening, while wiping down the dinner table, she noticed he had left his phone on the chair. The screen lit up. A message from another woman. The words weren't explicit, but the tone was unmistakably intimate. She froze, not out of jealousy, but because she realized she had given everything, but she was the only one still trying. That was the twist of fate. Not the betrayal, but the clarity, the knowing. This marriage wasn't here to be saved. It was here to awaken her. Ajahn Chah once said, "When you see things clearly, suffering is just suffering. It's not yours." She sat down on the floor, her back against the wall. For the first time, she didn't scream. She didn't beg. She just breathed. And in that breath, she understood. She had loved too much, but not the man. She had loved the illusion that if she was good enough, she would finally be worthy of love. She had mistaken love for approval. She thought she needed him, but in truth, she needed herself. Her effort wasn't wasted. It just didn't lead to a happy marriage. It led her back to her true self. She didn't fail. She had reached the deepest layer of a spiritual lesson. And you know, healing doesn't begin when someone finally loves you right. It begins when you stop begging to be loved at all. Because a heart that's awake no longer needs to be chased to feel worthy. If you've ever exhausted yourself trying to hold someone close, pause. Not to give up on them, but to finally return to yourself. Take a deep breath. We're about to enter even deeper waters, where familiar souls return to finish lessons that began long, long ago. She used to believe that if she was good enough, love would stay. And then one day, after all the effort, hope, and quiet despair, she stopped trying. No more questions, no more fixing, no more smoothing out the silence in their home. She simply existed, faintly, quietly. He barely noticed. He left early, returned late, and their conversations shrank to logistics. Bills, dinner, lost keys. But in that silence, something unexpected happened. One evening, as she sat in meditation, not searching for peace, just listening to her own breath, she heard him crying in the next room. It was quiet, concealed. The kind of cry you bury deep in your chest because you're ashamed of it. She didn't get up. She just stayed and breathed. For the first time, she didn't feel anger. She felt something softer, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel for him in a long time. Compassion. And then it hit her. He was hurting too. Not because of her, not because of anyone, but because there was a pain inside him that had never been named, never been held. A teaching from Ajahn Chah came to her mind. The defilements of the mind are just like visitors. Let them come, let them stay, let them go. She had spent so long seeing herself as the victim, the one who was hurt, the one who was left behind. But now, she saw something she wasn't ready to see before. They were both hurting, both unfinished, both shaped by wounds that had no words. He didn't know how to love, not because he was cruel, but because he had never been taught how to receive love. without conditions, without fear, without the need to earn it. So when she gave him something unconditional, he couldn't trust it. And because he couldn't trust it, he broke it, not to harm her, but because deep down, he didn't believe something that pure could ever be real. She sat there, seeing him not as her husband, but as a frightened child trapped in an adult body, a soul that never learned how to hold kindness without trembling. And that was the real twist. Not that he changed, not that she gave up, but that both of them had been living inside a memory, not a marriage, a pattern, begging to be seen. Maybe they wouldn't continue together. Maybe this marriage would end, but maybe it was never meant to last. Maybe it was meant to reveal. She didn't need to forgive him. She didn't need to leave or stay. She only needed to see and breathe, because sometimes liberation doesn't come from walking away. It comes from that quiet moment when you stop trying to change someone and simply allow them to be who they are. If you've ever waited for someone to change so that love could finally work, take a breath and ask yourself, is it their change I truly need? Or is it my own acceptance I've been longing for? We now step into the most sacred part of this journey, where the real mirror is no longer them. It's you. She thought that once she saw his pain, peace would follow. But the truth was much harder. In the days that came after, she lived in a strange gray space. Not broken, but not whole either. She wasn't crying. She wasn't hoping. She was simply existing. And in that quiet numbness, a conversation began. Not with him, but with herself. She asked, if he can't love me the right way, should I leave? But if I leave, am I giving up or finally choosing myself? And if I stay, is it for love or just a habit of enduring for too long? There were no clear answers, just her breath and a quiet voice inside that whispered, no one is making you suffer. You are simply holding on to what no longer fits. She sat in front of a mirror. For the first time in months, she looked into her own eyes. And strangely, they felt unfamiliar. Not the eyes of someone weak, but of someone who's been carrying too much for too long. Ajahn Chah once said, it's like carrying a heavy rock. You feel exhausted, but when someone asks why you're holding it, you say, I don't know. I've always held it. And that was it. She didn't need another reason to let go. She only needed to be honest. Was she holding on to love, or was it the fear of being alone? She realized how many years she had placed her happiness in someone else's hands. How often she had loved as if trying hard enough could make someone become the version she imagined. But now she understood. Love isn't waiting for someone to change. It's the courage to see clearly, even when what you see isn't what you hoped for. The twist came quietly. One early morning, before the sun had fully risen, she made herself a cup of tea and stepped into the backyard. No phone, no music, no one beside her, just her and the truth. And in that moment, for the first time, she felt peace, not because someone stayed, not because someone changed, but because she stopped running. She stopped trying to be someone else. She just was, raw, still, unwaiting. And in that stillness, she felt a kind of freedom she had never known. It didn't come from doing. It came from letting go. If you've ever asked yourself, is staying love or self-betrayal? Just know this. No one can define love for you. Only an awakened heart knows when it's time to let go. Not from giving up, but from finally understanding. And once that understanding lands, you begin to step into the light, where transformation doesn't begin with them. It begins with you. Truth doesn't arrive with a loud bell or dramatic moment. It comes quietly, like a silence inside you that you can no longer ignore. And for her, after months of living in conflict, that silence finally arrived. Not after a big fight, not after a final word from him. It came in the simplest of moments. Late afternoon light spilling onto the kitchen floor as she stood alone, hands in a bowl of water, halfway through washing dishes. No one did anything wrong. No one cried. No one walked away. But something inside her had ended. And from that ending, something began. She didn't announce she was leaving. She didn't pack her bags. Instead, she wrote a letter. Not to him, but to herself, from years ago. She wrote to the woman who once sacrificed everything just to feel loved. To the woman who believed that endurance was a noble form of love. And then she apologized. She said sorry for holding on so tightly for so long. Sorry for staying in what no longer fit. Sorry for silencing her own truth just to keep the illusion of harmony. Then she wrote a promise that from tomorrow forward, she would live as someone who believed she deserved softness. Not to prove anything, not to be accepted, but simply because she was enough. Ajahn Chah once said, try to let go, not just of others, but of yourself. And that's what she chose, not to change him, but to stop changing herself just to be loved by him. She returned to the quiet things that once made her happy, arranging flowers, listening to instrumental music, walking alone, without feeling incomplete. The twist of awakening wasn't in deciding to divorce. It was in realizing that even if she still lived in the same house, stood in the same kitchen, her soul had already left. Left the role of the good wife, left the script that said, if I just try a little harder. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew this. From now on, every choice would be rooted in clarity, not fear. She would speak with him, not to blame, but to close the chapter, not to control, but to free them both. Because no one can fully love you until you fully return to yourself. If you've been waiting for a sign to begin again, maybe the quiet exhaustion in your heart is the universe's deepest invitation. Let your next decision come not from the mind, but from the peace your soul has been longing for. In the end, marriage wasn't the destination. It was simply a resting point, a mirror that reflected her back to herself through the eyes of another. And sometimes what you see in that mirror isn't love, but the parts of you still longing to be healed. She no longer held anger, no longer carried regret, because now she understood. What happened between them may not have been true love in the fairy tale sense, but it was exactly what her soul needed, to come home to itself. She didn't need his apology. She didn't need a perfect ending. What she needed was truth, and she found it, not in him, but within. Ajahn Chah once said, peace doesn't come from controlling the world, but from letting go of yourself. And she had let go, not of a person, but of the role, not of love, but of the expectation that love would save her. And it was only when she stopped waiting for someone to heal her that she began the deepest healing of all. The final twist wasn't in whether the marriage ended or continued. It was in how she quietly changed roles, from someone needing to be loved to someone choosing to live awake. You don't need to hold on to someone. You only need to stay present enough to hold on to yourself. especially when your heart begins to lose its way. Take one more deep breath. And if you're still here, maybe it's because you're ready to begin a chapter that no longer repeats old karma. If you saw a part of yourself in this story, leave a simple comment. I'm learning to let go. Don't let this journey end with listening. Let it be the beginning of a return to yourself, to the stillness you deserve. Ajahn Chah once said, "You don't need to go anywhere to find the path. Just stop." And sometimes, one deep pause is enough to change an entire life. Some marriages arrive to teach you how to love, others to teach you how to let go. But if you think the lesson ends here, perhaps you've never seen how karma reappears after the divorce. Those who don't learn, repeat. Dhammapada. And that will be our next story.